Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a moment in time where the stakes were honestly just unimaginably high. We are looking at a nation on the absolute brink of tearing itself apart, and the solitary leader who stood right at the center of that massive storm, Abraham Lincoln.
But before we get into the timeline, ask yourself for a second, what actually happens when a nation fights itself? Just imagine a country so deeply fractured that brother is literally fighting brother. Imagine major cities burning to the ground, entire landscapes just scarred by artillery, and millions of lives fundamentally altered forever. You know, what happens when a country turns its most destructive forces entirely inward? Well, that is the profound existential crisis we're breaking down today.
Section 1. A Nation Divided. Let's rewind to the 1850s. Okay, so by the 1850s, America was completely and fundamentally fractured. You've got the industrialized northern states on one side, and they fiercely opposed the expansion of slavery into new Western territories. They were busy building this economy based heavily on manufacturing and free labor. But then, on the other side, the southern states had built their entire agricultural economy to be deeply and brutally dependent on enslaved labor. And listen, these weren't just background political disagreements or, minor policy debates. These were existential economic rifts that were growing more irreconcilable by the day.
Right into the middle of this powder keg steps a truly unlikely guy. Born into grinding poverty in a Kentucky log cabin back in 1809, Abraham Lincoln had virtually zero formal education. But he had this voracious appetite for reading. He actually taught himself the law, eventually making his way into the rough-and-tumble world of 19th century politics. And through sheer grit and a pretty masterful command of words, his unlikely ascent culminated in him being elected President of the United States in 1860, which, as we know, was the exact moment those national tensions hit an explosive boiling point.
Section 2. War tears America apart. The crucible erupts.
In Lincoln's election, that was the spark that blew everything wide open. Southern states were terrified his administration would dismantle their entire economic system and their way of life, so they made this drastic, completely unprecedented decision to secede. They formally withdrew from the United States and formed their own breakaway government known as the Confederacy. It was a constitutional crisis unlike anything the young republic had ever seen before.
Now, in response, the northern states, the Union, are staring down a massive crisis of their own. Despite the immense pressure of literally half the country violently breaking away, Lincoln committed to a singular, unwavering objective: preserving the United States as one unbroken nation. Surrender just was not an option here, and the lines were firmly drawn for the impending devastation.
Things escalated fast, and it was absolutely devastating. After Lincoln was elected in 1860, Confederate forces bombarded Fort Sumter in April of '61, and that officially ignited the deadliest conflict in American history. Over the next 4 years, the nation descended into total war. Hundreds of thousands perished on battlefields with names like Antietam and Shiloh. Families were torn apart, towns were utterly destroyed, and the very survival of the American experiment hung completely in the balance.
Section 3. Redefining the fight. A major shift in purpose.
By the time we hit 1863, the sheer scale of the bloodshed meant something had to change. A monumental shift in strategy was needed. So Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation. This was a sweeping, historic directive that formally declared freedom for enslaved people within Confederate-controlled territories. It was a seriously bold military and political maneuver, executed right in the thick of the fighting.
This one document completely rewired the whole purpose of the war. What started out as a strict political dispute just to save the Union was now glued to a massive moral imperative. The Civil War transformed from a legal battle over secession into a foundational fight for human freedom. The stakes were no longer just about boundaries on a map, They were about the very definition of liberty in America.
Later, that same year, standing near the freshly dug graves of fallen soldiers, Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address. And in just a few short minutes, using fewer than 300 words, he totally galvanized the Northern war effort. He profoundly reminded the public that they weren't just fighting for a border. They were fighting to ensure that democracy, equality, and liberty itself would not perish from the earth. Section 4. Victory and Sudden Tragedy. The tides finally turn. You see, the Union's vast industrial resources, their much larger population, and better infrastructure, it all just gradually overwhelmed the exhausted Confederacy. By the spring of 1865, the Confederate war machine had completely stalled out. General Robert E. Lee formally surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, which effectively ended this grueling 4-year nightmare.
The Union was saved, and the brutal institution of slavery was finally brought to an end. But man, that relief of victory? It was shattered almost immediately. On April 14, 1865, literally just days after the guns fell silent, sudden tragedy strikes a nation that was desperately trying to heal.
While he was out attending a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., Lincoln was assassinated by Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes Booth. He made it through the night, but the president passed away the following morning. The very leader who had successfully navigated America through its absolute darkest and bloodiest chapter was just suddenly gone. It left the newly reunited country reeling in this profound, totally unprecedented state of grief.
Section 5. An Enduring Legacy. Lincoln's Lasting Impact.
Today, we really can't overstate it. Abraham Lincoln's legacy is the bedrock of the modern United States. Against impossible political and military odds, he preserved the Union and spearheaded the dismantling of the horrors of slavery. And in doing so, he didn't just win a war, right? He forged an entirely new trajectory for the American Republic. He expanded the definition of exactly who was included in the nation's founding promise of equality. At the end of the day, Lincoln's story is this profound reminder that individual courage, relentless determination, and having an unwavering moral vision, they can actually alter the destiny of a whole nation. So as you reflect on this incredible crucible of history, I want you to ask yourself, how will your own courage and vision shape the future? Think about what you can build with that kind of determination. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.